Welcome to Wizards of the Tower,
Roleplay.
where we talk about everything role-playing games. Today, we're going to be talking about a book that Tom got me for the holidays. Blackmoor Foundations, History, Maps, and Lore, 71 to 85. Welcome to Wizards of the Tower.
Roleplay.
We're going to be talking about Blackmoor Foundations, History, Maps, and Lore, 71 to 85, the early fantasy RPG works of Dave Arneson. Now, Tom got me this for the holiday. This is one of my gifts. Pretty cool book.
Yeah, so why are we talking about it? Well, because we talk role-playing games, we talk D&D and Pathfinder, etc. And if you know anything about the original D&D creations back in the 70s, Dave Arneson was part of that. Now, of course, Gary Gygax, led a great sense of the path of it,
Right.
Kept pushing it forward, but Dave Arneson and a lot of his inspirations came about part of it. And, of course, there's the thing about Blackmoor, the setting that the games were taking place in. And so I think it's very important to talk about that. Not only because, you talk about the origins and the roots of something, it becomes easier to understand, but also when I was looking through that book, I realized how complex the settings were and how well written they were.
Yeah.
And how great the maps looked. And I thought, my goodness, this has really been overlooked. This has been overlooked as a campaign setting, and maybe we should talk about it.
Yeah. So, Blackmoor came about from, we mentioned, Dave Arneson, and it started in Dave Wesely's Braunstein
Right.
campaign that he started, which is really the foundation of RPGs.
It really is. I mean, people talk about it, what really started, but it was really that sort of wargaming scenario,
Yeah.
that they begin to work out their wargaming sessions. And from then, the genesis of D&D comes from that. And now, what really inspired Arneson's wargaming sessions? The Conan novels, Gothic horror, movies and books and stories that had villages, castles, multi-level dungeons, sorts of things like that. And I don't know if anybody here, is old enough to remember seeing stuff like the old Dracula movies or the old Boris Karloff movies. They took place in a creepy castle. There was elements of traps and dungeons and deep, steep staircases going
Mask
down
of the
and
Red
down.
Death.
Yeah, stuff like old stories and things like that.
Yeah.
That their settings were so rich, that in a sense it provides just an endless opportunity for creating, a setting for a game. Especially like knights in shining armor, valiant heroes, wizards, evil creatures. Monsters, dragons, trolls, goblins, giants, ghosts, specters, that sort of thing. So a lot of it, I was reading in there, a lot of it has to do with, the cinematic settings of things like the Lord of the Rings movies, or even the cartoons that we saw, probably at the cartoons at that time because it's the 70s.
Yeah, the Ralph Bakshi, Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, but also it's because the books, the Lord of the Rings books were so in-depthly descriptive that you couldn't help but pull from that, making it through, Mordor, the Darklands, Khazad-dûm, the Haunted Forests, everything like that. Really cool.
Yeah, and also The Black Room.
The Black Room is an old Boris Karloff movie that has, evil brothers and evil nobles and castles and villagers, poor tortured villagers and things like that. And then, of course, bringing in the horror aspects, which I didn't really realize until we started looking through there, but they brought in a lot of the horror aspects from things like Dark Shadows.
Yeah, and now I vaguely remember Dark Shadows. I loved that show as a kid growing up because I loved monster movies. And here I am, in the 60s growing up, and here I am watching Dark Shadows. It was a soap opera, but it was great because it was about a vampire.
Yeah.
And how Barnabas Collins became a vampire because of a witch that he spurned. And
Hey, it was heady stuff back then.
It was heady stuff.
It really was. I mean, there wasn't a lot of horror on TV because people didn't, they had to be, people didn't really want to frighten the kids.
Yeah.
But there was stuff on there that was really thought-provoking. Twilight Zone, Dark Shadows, Outer Limits, Night Gallery,
Yeah.
things like that were thought-provoking. Now TV has just become all shoot-'em-up violence. But back then...
Doctors, lawyers, and cop shows.
Yeah, doctors, lawyers, and cop shows. But back then, the whole idea was that you would have sort of a thought-provoking setting, and it would be an allegory for the real world. If people were mistreated in a horror movie, sort of like how we're mistreated in our daily lives by powerful people, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so you have these basic themes that were going to come forward in Blackmoor, a lot of these ideas, and that's, kind of creates the genesis of the role-playing game that we play today.
Yeah. So it started off, as we said, Dave Wesley's Braunstein, but then it morphed into the Castle and Crusade Society, which was Gygax and Arneson.
Yeah. And you get the two of them, and now, without getting into anything political, because we don't want to anger anybody about the Gygax Arneson thing, okay? But what struck me going through this book, which is an excellent book, is the amount of work that Arneson put into stuff.
Drawings.
His own hand drawings, his maps, all his settings that he put, trying to evoke a sense of dread by waking up in a dark room and not knowing where you are. These mystical lands full of rivers, mountains, trees, villages, cities. It's really, really, really in depth. And you got to wonder if he hadn't been able to come up with this stuff, if he hadn't been able to come up with this source material, if he wasn't just an endlessly creative individual, how far D&D would have gotten, just kind of milking the old Conan series without anything added into it. It's a serious question to ask.
I find this map very interesting. It's a hex crawl.
Yeah.
Drawn out.
Yeah.
It's all hexes. This, we can't show off too much of this. There's stuff that he has handwritten in here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Notes and
all his notes, all his setting information. The really beautiful maps. I was just really kind of impressed by the beautiful maps and stuff that's in there.
Some of the drawings.
Some of the hand drawings that were done with weaponry, settings for cities, for castle settings. Yeah, it's really interesting.
This is a really cool book, and I'm really glad Tom got me this because we both love the history of RPGs.
Yeah.
We've read of Dice and Men and there's several other ones that we've read.
So Blackmoor kind of comes after Greyhawk, and people kind of run them together. But a lot of the parts in Blackmoor and in Greyhawk survived all the way up until the initial demise of D&D back in the late 80s.
TSR,
yeah, when TSR was still going on, you had novels set in the Greyhawk area in the city, the Free City, and all that stuff. And so, it's in my opinion, this kind of source material is extremely important because it really provides a foundation for creating your scenario, your gaming scenario. And I know a lot of people like to create canned scenarios, but for all you DMs out there, and I appreciate you, trust me, when you come up with your own homebrews, I'm in your corner because I love homebrews. And Delaney makes homebrews. She's got an entire shelf over here of source material that probably rivals stuff Dave Arneson had.
And a website, and a OneNote thing that's just loaded clear full.
Just loaded with stuff, loaded with maps, cities, dungeons, characters, calendars, everything. Yeah. And one of the things that really struck me, let me see that book, is the complexity of this and how much love and integrity people put into it so they could play games. Now, games are really important for us. Games are really important because they provide a distraction, they provide a way to focus, and they provide a social setting where we could get together with our friends and play games and be competitive, but also have a lot of fun.
Have some laughs.
Have some laughs, do stuff like that. I find that to be really interesting, and I really love that kind of thing. So I'm going to read to you just a little bit of this, and it's very in depth, and it shows the complexity and the care and concern that he took about creating a scenario. So this is called Return to Blackmoor. Blackness, total and all-encompassing, so that any thought of light seemed alien. a darkness that went on forever. Still, it wasn't all that bad. The light would come back. Eventually it would, and it had been some time since I had last seen it, and it was easier to sleep when there wasn't any light around. It did seem that there was an uncomfortable rock resting under my shoulder, plus an increasing feeling of laying in the midst of a swamp. There was also a feeling that the darkness was due to something other than having a hangover or some other natural ailment that made this sleep more unnatural than it should be. I suppose that a review of the events leading up to this situation would solve my mind refusing to supply any other data than a picture. Running from a large being or being engulfed by an explosion, followed by blackness. Some of it was the funniest looking stuff that I've ever encountered. So he had really added all this stuff in there, all the sensations, of feelings of being being encapsulated in darkness, of not knowing how you got there, not knowing how you're going to get out. It was really interesting to read this, because this is how the genesis of the system came about, creating this setting. And I find it really fascinating. I would recommend this to anybody who's not a gaming historian, but who likes to create campaigns, to look and see how the story progresses.
Yeah. So I was really thrilled when Tom gave me this for one of my holiday gifts.
Hey, we should all have a library of gaming books, in my opinion. If you're really a serious gamer, I mean, you should have a library of gaming books where really you can use as resources. And I'd like to know, from people who, create their own campaigns or create their own homebrews, what you use as resources, what your inspirations are, how you feel about, something like Dave Arneson's writings, his drawings, his maps. What inspires you? I mean, that'd be really interesting to hear about.
Yeah, my inspirations are so vivid. Maybe we ought to do an episode on that.
Yeah,
sometime.
Maybe we will.
But anyway, we hope you like this episode of Wizards of the Tower.
Roleplay.
And may all your adventures be epic and not in darkness.
And keep on rolling, even if you're in the darkness.
Thanks, folks.